Isabela Luna was walking all the days by the main hallway of the 25th floor with the folder against the chest and eyes towards the ground. Each step measured the weight of a life contained. There was learned to move without doing noise, to disappear among the glass walls and the suits grays that surrounded her. The law firm Soto and Vargas was a cathedral of power where the surnames were inherited as properties and where she, a woman without connections, neither securities. Bombastic, it was barely an efficient shadow. He arrived before everyone else. He left later. I knew the habits of each partner and the rhythm hidden from each client. Nobody recognized him. His efficiency was expected. His silence demanded. For most, she was Javier Soto's assistant. Nothing more. Camila Vargas looked at her as if it was a system error. Every time I walked past, Isabela could feel that disdain covered in expensive perfume. Camila was the partner of a senior partner, a woman used to being the center, to be feared and obeyed. He never greeted her, never pronounced his name. But it was precisely Camila who, with a tone full of mockery, he suggested to Javier that he invite everyone, even his assistant at the firm's annual party. Javier, caught between the cynicism and routine, he agreed without thinking in the consequences. For Isabela, the invitation was a surprise wrapped in suspicions. He hesitated in attend. She knew that those kinds of events weren't for her, but something inside, a taut thread that led years accumulating silences, he decided accept, not as submission, but as active presence. For the first time in a lot time, Isabela looked at herself in the mirror not as the assistant, but like the woman she was before she shrank to fit into a world that didn't see her. The night of the party arrived with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Isabela chose a dark red dress that she had purchased years back in a clearance, carefully stored for the occasion that never arrived. He combed his hair carefully, gathering his hair in an elegant bun, and used the only earrings she had left from her mother. She took the subway, walked 2 blocks, and arrived alone at the hotel where the celebration was being held. At the door, security personnel hesitated for a second before letting her pass. No one recognized her immediately, but when crossed the threshold of the living room, everything stopped for a moment. The conversations murmured, the laughter fake, even the background music. There was she, standing with her back straight and her gaze firm, like if I didn't ask permission to be, but simply belonged. If this part touched you, subscribe to the channel. We need your help. Support to continue telling stories like this. Camila was the first in react. He tilted his head, outlining a smile poisonous, and advanced towards she with a glass in hand. What brave. Come alone and dressed so, he whispered near your ear, with the false cordiality of someone who knows she's being watched. Isabela didn't blink. I preferred come alone than enter hanging on someone's last name, he replied without raising his voice, but with a clarity that made several guests turn their heads. Camila stayed changed for a second, surprised for the answer. Javier, who was watching from fence with a mixture of guilt and fascination, took a step towards them. But Isabela, already there, was advanced among the attendees, calmly greeting those who had ignored during years. Every word, his smile was undone, a sewing of the invisible suit that kept her trapped. That night, without intending to, she began to unstitch years of contempt with elegance and conviction. It make you think about anyone. Send them this video and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. You did. Really it. We need to continue. The partners of the firm, they exchanged looks, uncomfortable. None knew as react to the presence of someone who until then only brought them coffee or corrected them discreetly the errors in the contracts. One of them, the further young, tried joke with someone phrase condescending, but Isabela responded in perfect French, doing it blush in front of his colleagues. Another, remembering vaguely his resume, he mumbled something about volunteering, and he took the opportunity to talk, naturally, without boasting. about his experience coordinating inclusion projects in rural areas of Latin America and its passage through an organization internationally based in Paris. I didn't say it to impress, but because it was true, because during years, his whole life had been encapsulated in a position that did not reflect neither 10% of its history. Among the guests, there was a journalist who covered events, social and business for a digital magazine. There was gone by obligation, waiting right about the speeches, boring as always, but something about Isabela's presence caught his attention. He approached cautiously, asked her some minutes, and it was over recording a short interview. There, same, in the hall of the bathrooms. He asked her by his history, and she, without boasting neither resentments, spoke of his trajectory, of the invisible barriers that women face in environments elitist, and the power of dignity when one refuses to follow being invisible. The journalist eye, moved and surprised, went up the video that same night, without imagining that the next day his content would go viral. Millions of people saw and shared the video of the assistant who gave them a lesson to the powerful. For Isabela, that it was a simple outburst. For the rest of the country, a shake. On Monday, the entire office was buzzing with tension. Some pretended not to have seen the video. Others, in low voices, they commented excerpts from the interview as if it were a scene from a movie they didn't expect star. Isabela arrived punctual, like always, with his folder against the chest and serene gaze. This time, however, no one could ignore her. The receptionist, who never addressed her, more than an automatic "hello," he stood up to greet her respectfully. One of the secretaries offered him coffee. Even one of the partner's older people attempted a gesture friendly, nervous, like who faces to someone who has suddenly become important. The virality had been converted in someone visible, but Isabela did not change his attitude. He did his eye work with the same precision, but knowing that they could no longer reduce it to its role. Camilla, in change. I didn't know as react. There was past the weekend, seeing as his plan was falling apart. His social circle was divided. Some defended her, others pointed her out as the person responsible for having tried humiliate a woman valuable. Her social media account, once filled with praise, is now had comments questioning his attitude. Isabela's interview didn't name her, but all they knew who there was. The invitation was issued in mocking tone. Javier, who until then had been kept out of the way, felt a mixture of guilt and admiration. What began as a omission, he disparagement towards Isabela without intervening. Now he burned it by inside. That same tomorrow, he asked a meeting urgent with the other's partners. I knew something had to change, and that the first step, for a time, it was to tell the truth in voice high. The meeting was tense from the first minute. Some partners were furious for the exhibition media, fearing for the reputation of the firm. Others, although in minority, recognized that what had happened was an opportunity to review practices internal. Javier, with tired eyes and a dull voice, firm, he took the floor. We made a mistake, he said bluntly. It wasn't an incident isolated. For years we ignore talent of a person because he did not belong to our circle, and that says more about us than it does about her. The words fell heavy in the room. No one expected him, one of the pillars of the company, would position itself in that way. But it was not an act impulsive. Javier had passed the weekend reviewing documents, viewing interviews, reading comments. There were understood that the damage was not only to the firm's image, but also to its own awareness. That same one late, he wrote a public letter and sent it to one of the main newspapers in the country. It was not a defense, neither an excuse. It was an apology, not in tone corporate, but human. He recognized that they had failed, that they had wasted Isabela Luna's talent by class prejudice, and that I had to change. We don't ask sorry by have been cruel at an event, he wrote. We asked sorry by have been blind people during 3 years. The letter spread quickly. Some applauded it, Others criticized it as an attempt to cleanse her image, but for Isabela, it was unexpected, not because believed that Javier was incapable of doing it, but because I didn't expect him to have the courage to break with your own environment. For the first time, someone within that system, he spoke the truth. And that, more than any other gesture, he made stop to think. Isabela did not respond immediately. For days, she avoided interviews. He rejected invitations from television programs and asked his circle further close that they would not feed. He morbid. I knew that visibility had a price, and it wasn't there willing to become in a symbol social media void. Meanwhile, they reached him proposals, labor of foundations, universities and companies, interested parties in show an inclusive image. Some were sincere, but most were opportunists. Among all of them, he chose one that did not offer fame nor money. One small organization that promoted digital literacy among adults older. There, in a room community with computers, antiques, and chairs folding, Isabela returned to meet with your vocation. Teach with patience, look into the eyes, build trust. That was the world in the one who believed. No, the one with the lights, but the one of the links real. Javier looked for her weeks later, not as a boss, but as someone who needed learn. He found her in the middle of a class, helping a lady to send your first email. Electronic. He waited in silence until he finished. When he came closer, he was not wearing suit nor speeches prepared. Just one notebook in the hand and a proposal. Build together a new project, one that offered free legal advice in flexible hours, in centers community, with language simple, focused in real people. I don't come to offer you a position, I come to ask you help, he said. Isabela looked at him for a long time. She didn't say yes right away. But something in his look, it was no longer distrust. It was analysis, maturity, and a glimmer of hope. Because by first time, someone who came from the same world that had it crushed, he sat down forehead to she as the same. And that, to begin with, was enough. If you've made it this far, it's because this story matters to you. Help us keep going. Subscribe. Now same to the channel. The project began like a pilot in a community center in the south of the city. No advertising, no photos for social media, just simple tables and volunteers. Committed and a couple of lawyers willing to learn more than what they taught. Isabela designed each detail, from the forms until the tone of the sessions. I wanted no one felt shame for not knowing, that each person felt heard. Javier, by his part, I learned, I listened more than he spoke. He took notes of everything. What he used to solve with legal jargon, he now translated. In simple words, he discovered that the law, when it moves away from people, ceases to have sense, and that many times the true can this in explain, not in impose. Between the two of them, they formed a team unexpected, but cash. Every day, they arrived more people to the center, not for legal necessity only, but for something deeper, for I respect. The media, they began to notice he changed, but this time was different. There was no scandal, nor viralization forced. There was transformation. The magazine that previously existed published Isabela's interview, returned months later to do a follow-up. They found a space full of life, young people advising to adults older, retired lawyers teaching to students, and an environment where no one felt less. The article did not talk about an assistant who rose, but about a woman who rebuilt her sense of justice from her heart. When the note was published, the headline read, "Where the right sits to listen." It was then when others, signatures legal, they began to copy he model, not by fashion, but by social pressure. But none could replicate his spirit that Isabela had sown, because she didn't found a program. She founded a different way of looking at the others, and that is not taught. It is live. At the firms Soto and Vargas, the echoes of the change were felt strongly. Javier's departure had left a void symbolic, but also an opportunity. Some partners, annoying by your letter and your attitude, they tried. Erase it from the decisions. However, the customers, further important, they began to do questions. They wanted to know if the signature there was learned something. Yes, would do changes real. The pressure increased. One of the main customers even threatened to withdraw his accounts if they were not implemented. Policies, clear inclusion, and ethics labor. In view of this, there was no further option to give up. The board of directors, for first time in years, summoned an internal culture. Audit organizational. They were established protocols to combat he-classism and the sexism, and a committee was created led by all staff, the levels, including assistants and aides. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and everyone they knew who they owed that shock. Meanwhile, Isabela continued rejecting invitations to give talks, motivational, or write a book about self-improvement. He didn't want his history was reduced to a narrative simplistic. He wasn't interested in fame. Either he preferred mornings calm in his center community, the workshops where taught how to read rental contracts, shared coffees with grandmothers who learned how to use video calls. Her relationship with Javier became further solid, but not in his sense romantic. There was between them a serene complicity, a friendship based in I respect mutual. Never. They talked about what could have been. They didn't need to. They knew that the real connection between two people does not always end in a kiss, but in a shared cause. And on that ground, they walked side by side, neither in front nor behind, together but free. One day, while reviewed some forms with a volunteer, Isabela received a call unexpected. It was from a university public. They offered him coordinate a new internship program, legal community, based in the model that she and Javier had implemented. At first, he hesitated, not for fear, but for not wanting to get away from work directly with the people. But the proposal included something that touched him heart. She same could design the curriculum, train the teachers, and even include subjects of communication, listening active and ethical applied. He accepted with a condition. The program I had to bear a name that did not reference to she. I didn't want to monuments, I wanted bridges. So the Citizen Network of Accessible Justice was born, a project that, in a few months, it was replicated in several cities in the country, with hundreds of students working in neighborhoods and communities that had never before had free legal advice. Camilla, meanwhile, had disappeared from the spotlight. Public. After the viralization of the case and Javier's letter, his influence at the signing, he left diluting. He tried return to your world of events and appearances, but I couldn't find it anymore, he same echo. His name had been turned uncomfortable, associated with the contempt that so many now rejected. Some, they said that it had been moved abroad, others that he planned open an image consultant. Isabela never kept it to herself resentment. I knew that people like Camilla were also product of a system that rewarded pride. One day, he even received an anonymous letter with no sender. It simply read, "I missed you. I hope that someday someone will see me." Isabela didn't need to know who sent it. She kept it in a drawer next to newspaper clippings, photos of the center community, and thank you notes. It was part of their history, but not its center. 1 year after the famous party, the firms Soto and Vargas organized an event a lot further modest. This time, there was no designer suits, neither luxury salons. It was in a library public, with plastic chairs and coffee served in terms. The reason, to present an impact report on its new social responsibility program, inspired, although they never said it openly, in the revolution silent that Isabela had initiated. They invited former members, employees, representatives of NGOs, and some leaders community. Isabela was one of the last in arrive. He was not wearing red, but clothes simple and one notebook in his hand. He greeted her politely, but unceremoniously. He knew that his presence was uncomfortable to some, but also inspired many. At the end of the event, Javier climbed the small platform and without looking at anyone in particular, he said, "The true change begin when we stop pretending that everything okay, and we start to hear." After the speech, he approached to Isabela with one smile calm. There was past a lot from that letter, and although had worked together all that time, never had talked about that one evening in detail. "Do you regret having gone?" he asked her. She looked at him for a second and then replied, "No, it was necessary. Not because of what happened there, but so I decided after." That phrase was left floating between them, like a conclusion without drama, but with weight. They said goodbye without hugs or promises. Each one returned to his place, but they both knew that what had been built between them, although without labels, was one of those things rare and valuable that do not need explanation, because had learned, by force of errors and truths, which some relationships are not defined as it is said, but so it is transformed. As time went by, Isabela's story began to circulate in universities, human rights forums and discussion spaces, about meritocracy and class, not as a fairy tale heroic, but as an example uncomfortable and real. Teachers, they cited his case to talk about discrimination silent. Students invited her to talk not as a celebrity, but as a woman who had faced contempt every day with integrity. She accepted some invitations, as long as it was not treated as symbol. It refused to be used as flag of causes they did not understand his background. I preferred count his history complete, the years of silence, the pain of being invisible, the temptation to give up. But he also spoke of the relief he felt the day he decided stop begging approval. "It is not about the world change suddenly," he said. "It's about stopping giving away your voice to fit in." One of the moments further emotional occurred in a small university of the interior. After a talk, a young man approached him, crying. She was the daughter of a woman who had been cleaner in a law firm by decades. He told her that thanks to his history, she had encouraged to apply for a legal internship where I previously thought I had none place. "I want to be a lawyer, so my mum can see that not everything was in vain," she told him. Isabela hugged her, in silence. That was the type of impact that mattered. Not the headlines nor the statistics, but that change intimate, deep, that is born when a person feels seen. That night, on the return trip, Isabela thought that maybe that was his true role now, not to lead crowds, but light small lights in places where before there was only shadow. Isabela's life had been filled with meaning, but also with calm. I no longer needed prove nothing. There was reached a place where I respect permission not of charges or recognitions, but of coherence. Every week, he continued going downtown community, now converted in a network of legal advice and training. There, he shared mate with neighbors, organized workshops for migrants, trained young people, volunteers. Javier visited her from time to time in Wen, not as a founding partner, but as one more. He listened, he collaborated, he learned. No one in his center treated him with reverence, and he was grateful. In that space, there was found a place where I didn't need to represent nothing, just be. From time to time in Wen, they joked about the famous party, but further as anecdote, that as myth, because the important thing was not the triumphal entry, but everything that came after. One day, an insistent publisher proposed to Isabela, to write a book, not about but about his vision of justice. He accepted with a condition that the proceeds be donated fully financed further center's community. The book was titled Seeing is Recognizing, and it mixed stories real with reflections personal. I didn't mean to give lessons, but show as the systems, when they are filled with filters social, they leave out those who further need to be included. The text, it was well received and used in schools and universities. But what most moved Isabela went receive a handwritten letter from a 72-year-old man who learned to read in one of your workshops. "Thanks to you, "Today I can understand what I'm signing," she said. She kept that letter in the same drawer as the previous one, along with others, so many small evidence that the change, although slow, was possible. And that did not make lack applause, just perseverance. In a radio interview, many years after, the journalist asked him, "Yeah, I would change something about your history." Isabela stayed in silence for a long moment. Then he responded with a soft smile. "Maybe I would have dared to speak before, but I also understand that each stuff occurred when it had to happen. Sometimes the pain is the only teacher who listens when nobody, the more he does it." The phrase was reproduced in multiple means, although she wasn't looking for notoriety. His voice, slow and clear, had become turned reference for a generation that did not want repeat the themselves mistakes of their parents. It was not just about legal justice, but about justice every day. That which occurs in the offices, in the greetings, in the way of looking at the other. Isabela spoke about that, of the ways silent in which it is built or collapsed a dignity. At the firm Soto and Vargas, the changes structural continued. The ethics committee turned permanent. It was established a promotion policy based in evaluations internal and external, eliminating favoritism. A team of psychologists was hired labor, and a complaints channel was opened anonymous for cases of discrimination. At the level external, they created an internship program for students from communities peripheral, with scholarships and support. Many doubted the sincerity of these changes, but the truth is that they began to show results. Royals. Isabela's name was not listed in none document official, but all they knew that without her, none of that would happen. There would be existed, even in the impact reports, when we talked about the before and the after, the breaking point. It was always the same. That one evening in which one assistant, she entered a party, not to be celebrated, but to stop being invisible. In private, Javier maintained a notebook with notes about what has been learned in these years. They were not notes legal, neither impact. Figures. They were phrases, names, moments. I remembered as used to talking about inclusion without understanding it, how I looked without seeing, and how accepted silences by comfort. On one of the pages wrote, "Leadership is not taking decisions by others. It is to make sure that everyone can to speak, to decide, to be." That phrase became a kind of compass for him. He left back his ambition to climb in the hierarchy business and dedicated himself to replicating his model, community in other cities, with teams young and committed. Sometimes they invited him to speak in forums, but always he said the story wasn't his. "I just learned in time." The protagonist was another. It was his way to keep the truth intact. One day, while I was walking by a square, Javier found to Isabela sitting on a bench reading. He wasn't surprised. He sat down at his side and, after a long silence, asked him, "Yeah, sometime there was dreamed of that future." "No," he replied. I only dreamed of power, walk into a room without being measured from head to toe." They both laughed, but not bitterly. It was a serene laughter, of those who they have vivid enough to understand that the respect is not begged for, it is built. That day they did not talk about projects, nor of the past. They shared an ice cream, watched some children play, and they commented weather. To anyone, they were just two ordinary people, but in that scene, simple. There was further justice that in many courts, two individuals, equal, who once time inhabited worlds opposites, now sharing shadow and silence without anyone I had to ask permission to be over there. With the passing of the years, Isabela's figure became reference, but she insisted in continue being a more, never allowed the center community would take his name, nor accepted tributes that placed her by on top of the team. For her, the true achievement was to see to others lead, to young people who previously doubted their courage to take decisions, to women, seniors defend their rights with voice firm. It was common for Isabela to sit at the end of the table during team meetings, taking notes, listening more than talking. But when spoke, everyone, they were silent. not because fear neither hierarchy, but by respect. His authority came not from his position, but from his consistency. Many volunteers knew were taking time weeks in, realized that that serene woman was the project director, and she loved it that way. One day he received an invitation to participate in a documentary about women who transformed institutions from inside. He hesitated in accept, but when they told him that they would also include two others leaders, social anonymous, he agreed. During the recording, they asked him what had happened to her, sustained in the moments further hard. She thought for a moment and replied, "The certainty that I am worth, even when nobody recognizes it." That phrase was left in the trailer for the documentary, and it went viral, not because bombastic, but by deeply certain. Hundreds of women. They began to share the phrase on networks, accompanied by its own stories. Isabela couldn't get used to it to that exhibition, but understood that his testimony opened doors, and if his voice could make another woman would stop feeling invisible, then it was worth it. Not out of ego, but by responsibility, because he power of one. History is not in who lives it, but in who listens to it and decides to act. In a late anyone, while they organized an archive old man from the center community, a voluntary found a photo wrinkled. It was from the first day of the project pilot. Isabela appeared in the background with a notebook in hand and serious expression. To his side, Javier, more young, more rigid, also held papers. The image was scanned and placed on an internal mural under the title. So began everything. When Isabela saw her, she smiled tenderly. She remembered that day clearly, the fear, uncertainty, but also the determination not to return back. That image did not show heroes nor saviors. It showed two people learning to look different. Sometimes, in visit school children to the center, the guides they use the photo to explain that the real change begins when someone, in silence, dares to say enough. In it, anniversary number 10 of the project, organized a day open to the public. There were workshops, advice, activities for children, and a final talk where they spoke several coordinators. Isabela did not want to give his keynote address. He preferred invite a young man who had started as service user and was now a team lawyer. When the day was over, while all they applauded, Isabela retired to the kitchen to help with the order. There, while washed cups next to one voluntary knew, this one asked her if it was true that she had changed. An entire law firm. Isabela laughed and said, "No, I just showed that I was possible to do it. Those who changed were they, or at least they started." That was his way of seeing it, he whirled, not as something that is conquered, but as something that is built, with small steps, open hands, and a look that does not lower itself before anyone. In an interview, university student asked him, "Yeah, sometime there was sense, desire for revenge, to show everyone what they missed out on by underestimating her." Isabela looked at him patiently and replied, "It's not about proving, it's about not missing out on someone." Same in his process. He explained that the resentment is a burden that ends up weighing you down more than humiliation. That his aim never was to do failing anyone, but recover his own voice. That one answer generated a silence uncomfortable in the auditorium. Many were waiting a revenge story, but she was telling them, offering something more. Difficult, dignity without anger, strength without violence. Upon leaving, several students came up to tell him that that was the lesson further valuable of their careers, one that was not in the law books, but that should be. Some time later, one of the ancient partners of the firm, already retired, crossed paths with Isabela at a labor rights event. He greeted her with a clumsy, sincere handshake. "I want to ask you, I apologize," he said. "I apologize too." Ignored him. She listened to him attentively, without any need for grandiloquent words. "Thank you for say it," he replied simply. "I didn't need that past would change, but yes, so that it would not be repeated." In that brief encounter, both closed a cycle. There were no hugs or photos, just two people recognizing each other as equal. perhaps by first time. And that, Isabela thought upon returning home, is also justice, not that of the courts, but that of the acts, everyday things, that repair what never should have break. In its personal notebook, that evening wrote a single line, being seen without having to shout. With the time, some big signatures, they began to use his history as example in their training internal. But Isabela put clear limits. It did not authorize her use of her image if there was no real commitment behind it. Once, a consultant wanted to invite her to a chat in a luxury hotel with paid admission and a focused marketing campaign in Overcoming Feminine. He rejected the proposal with a brief but forceful, "My story is not a product, it is a consequence of many absences. If you want to inspire, start by change their practices internal." That one answer was leaked on social media, and it was widely applauded, not because it was confrontational, but because it was coherent. In a world where many they look for capitalized causes, Isabela's integrity became a beacon. She did not negotiate his dignity, nor his history. Javier, now completely dedicated to social work, he used to tell that working with Isabela had taught more than all his previous career. He said that he used to believe in his merit as axis of everything, but she taught him to look the starting point. "Not all begin from the same place," he repeated in each chat. With the years, his relationship with Isabela became in a bow unbreakable, although never romantic. Some didn't understand it. They wanted pigeonhole them in a narrative of loving redemption. But they knew that theirs was more rare and more strong, one alliance ethics. They knew each other without masks, without ornaments, without owing anything. It was that freedom between them which made each reunion was natural. They could go weeks without speaking, but when they did it, they took it up again exactly where they had it left, as if time in between was not distance, but maturation. One afternoon, Isabela received a visit from a young lawyer who had been hired by the firm Soto and Vargas, thanks to the new inclusion program. He told her that during his interview, the partners, they mentioned the Luna case as part of the transformation institutional. They didn't know that IT knew outside. "By you job here," the young woman said, smiling. Isabela listened to her attentively and then said something that stuck with her, recorded forever. "Never you think you got in by a fee. You entered because he system finally. Odrid began to look where I didn't see before." That phrase accompanied her all his career. Years after, when that young man became in judge, confessed in an interview that your vocation was born in that center community, and that there was no guide been a book of laws, but a woman who walked without noise, but left fingerprint. The center community was growing, with support from universities, organizations, civilians, and committed people expanded to other regions of the country. Some called it the Model Luna, but Isabela always, he corrected, "This belongs to everyone." In each new team, he insisted in form leaders rotating, train without hierarchies, and encourage listening as central tool. When asked what was your formula, he said, "Truly listen, nothing more." For many that it seemed like little, but in practice, changing the way you listen to others, the rest was to transform the entire power structure. It was not just about advising legally, but to give people back their confidence in his own voice. And that, I knew well, was a lot further difficult than drafting a contract or winning a lawsuit. It was perhaps the most important that there was made in his life. One rainy night, while they closed, he sent her after a long day. A voluntary young man asked him to Isabela. Yes, some time had been had sense alone in that whole process. She stayed thoughtful for a moment before answering. "A lot times. But I learned that being alone is not always being empty. Sometimes it is being full of a conviction that has not yet had an echo." That phrase was left recorded in the voluntary, who years then he converted it in a title of an essay prize about leadership feminine. For Isabela, those small seeds were the essential, I did not seek that his history was repeated as myth, but rather served as a basis for stories new, own, adapted to others' contexts. He understood that each person had his own path, and that the important thing was to recognize the moment in which one has to stop asking permission to occupy his place. It inspire you in any way. Like, leave your comment, and please subscribe. That way we can continue sharing stories like this. In a celebration intimate by the 15 years of the First Center community, the ancient team members organized a surprise. They had collected letters, testimonies, and videos from impacted people by Isabela's work. That night, amidst tears, laughter, and hugs, a video was shown where people from all over the country appeared, saying a single sentence, "Thank you for seeing me." Isabela couldn't avoid get excited, not because vanity, but because those words summed up her life's struggle. See, be seen, make seen. At the end of the event, someone asked her that followed what was his next step. She smiled and said, "Continue walking. This is not a summit. It's just a station." Because for Isabela Luna, the important thing was not a destination, but the way you walk, with your eyes open, your head held high, and the heart clean. With the passage of time, the Isabela's name also began to be heard outside the country. Organizations international, justice networks, community and universities, foreigners began to interest by his approach. She was invited to participate in panels about access to justice, where his voice contrasted with speeches technicians full of statistics. She spoke of faces, of names, of experiences concrete. In one of those meetings, an academic European told him, "You have done further from a small center community that many governments hold." Isabela responded humbly, "I just did what anyone would do if he refuses to accept that injustice is normal." He was not looking recognition, but I knew that if his way of working could inspire to others' places, I had to continue sharing. Thus, without intending to, your legacy spread further beyond the borders, and its voice was beginning to form part of a global conversation. Despite this growth, Isabela remained faithful to his origins. He lived in the same neighborhood, in an apartment modest, surrounded by books, plants, and family photos. It had no personal assistant, nor driver, no agenda managed by third parties. He continued taking the subway, shopping in the market, and greeting everyone, the neighbors, by his name. That, for her, was freedom, to be someone recognized without ceasing to be who she was. She was often asked, I wouldn't have liked to have other life, with more luxuries or comforts. And he replied, I have the life I chose, and I chose it when I stopped accepting what others offered me by pity. Because further beyond everything social impact, the prizes or the headlines, Isabela Luna had achieved something that very few they get, to live in accordance with their truth every day without giving up its essence. One afternoon, while organized some materials in a center, one girl of about 10 years approached timidly. Came with her grandmother, who attended literacy classes. The girl looked at her fixed and asked, "Are you the one who made my grandmother not have afraid to read?" Isabela crouched down to her height and replied, "No, your grandmother is the one who dared. I was just here to accompany her." The girl nodded, as understood more than it seemed. Those kinds of moments were those that marked her the most, because they reminded her that the real impact is not always measured in numbers or reports, but in gestures, daily newspapers that open futures different. And that, although the world changed slowly, one look may be enough to sow a seed that germinates many years after. In his birthday number 50, the center team wanted to celebrate it, but she asked for something different. Instead of a party, he organized a day of service with doors open in all the country, replicated in each headquarters of the Citizen Justice Network. That day, more than 1,000 volunteers. They attended to people in situation of vulnerability. They offered talks in public squares and carried legal advice to rural areas. At the end of the day, Isabela sat alone in a bench in the central park of the neighborhood where all there was started, closed eyes for a moment, breathed deep and smiled. There was no cameras, nor speeches, nor applause, only the murmur of the people, talking, children running, and a feeling of fullness that it was not possible by neither manufacture. In its silence, I knew that everything it was worth it, because there was chosen not to be a spectator of life, but author active in a change that no longer depended only on her. Years further afternoon, one journalist proposed him do a biography authorized. Isabela thought about it during weeks and finally rejected the idea. My story doesn't need a version definitive. It is still being writing done, but not only by me, he said. What I do aloud was the creation of an open digital archive where anyone could share stories of personal transformation linked to access to justice. That project became in a platform collaborative where hundreds of voices, from farmers to students, from immigrants to retirees, they shared as had recovered his dignity. Every story had a space, without hierarchies, neither filters. For Isabela, that diversity was its greatest victory, not having been an exception that confirmed the rule, but a spark that ignited others. It didn't matter that his name was not there in everywhere. What mattered was that more people felt able to say, I deserve to be seen too. In one of the meeting's annual network, an older woman took a microphone and said, before I knew this center, I thought being poor meant not having rights. Now I know I have voice. And what can I do? Use it. That phrase caused an ovation, spontaneous. Isabela, sitting at the back of the room, applauded with emotion contained, because that was, in essence, the reason for everything that there was done. There was no formula magical, there was no saviors, only people who, when feeling accompanied, they dared to cross the bridge between the silence and the word. And in with each of those crossings, a new sense of justice was born, the one of the codes, but the one that is built when someone stops looking down, when someone finally allows themselves to occupy his place without asking apologies by exist. In an exercise symbolic, the center team community decided remove the old one record book with which Isabela had started. In his place, they placed a time capsule where each collaborator let a letter addressed to his future with his dreams for the next 10 years. Isabela at first did not want to write her own, but at the end of the day, she was left alone in her living room, took a piece of paper and wrote, I hope you continue believing in people, even when it seems that everything goes backwards, and that never forget that what you did only had sense because others, they believed with you. Then he folded the sheet carefully, placed it inside, and sealed the box with a serene smile. I didn't think in as I would be remembered, but in that type of world would help build. Continued true to his principles. They passed the years, and the story of Isabela Luna stopped being told in present. The centers followed working, the new ones generations they took a leadership, and his face turned less visible, but his impact remained in each decision every day, in each policy revised, in each conversation further fair. There was no statues nor avenues with their name, but there was hundreds of people who, when treated with respect in an office public or heard in a courtroom without knowing it, they were part of his legacy. Because Isabela didn't change his world in one fell swoop. He did it as lived in silence, firmly and step by step. And although some were looking for a fairy tale narrative, there was demonstrated something a lot further powerful, that one woman, without wanting to be a heroine, can transform institutions whole, simply being consistent with who he is. Every day, one day, in a university where already nobody remembered his face in detail, a teacher explained to his students how the transformations social sometimes begin in places unexpected. He told the case of an assistant who had entered in silence at a party and without intending to, there was open a crack in a structure that seemed unbreakable. He showed the old video of his interview, the one that had been viralized for so many years back. The students listened to him attentively. Some they took notes, others they just looked at her speak. One of them, at the end of the class, asked in voice high, "And what was it hers?" The professor. He smiled and replied, "I don't know for sure, but I am sure that we continue working so that no one further have to be invisible." In a library public of a distant city, a young mother leafing through a book on labor rights. In the first page, there was a dedication handwritten, for whom sometime he thought he didn't have voice. Here starts everything. I didn't know who had it written, but something in the phrase moved her. She decided ask legal advice to regularize his situation. Labor, and therefore first time, felt that he had control over his future. That chain, silent as small things acts. One phrase, a talk, a validating look. It was still alive, multiplying noiselessly, neither credits. And although Isabela Luna no longer appeared in the media, neither he held visible positions, his essence was present in each place where justice there was ceased to be a privilege and had become a common right. Because her greatest achievement was not being remembered, but have fact that thousands never further were forgotten. In a corner of your old neighborhood, where all there was started, someone painted an unsigned mural. It showed a woman with her back turned, with a file in hand and a line of people following her. Not like followers blind, but as equals that walked together. Nobody said it was Isabela, but everyone understood it. Not because the face was identical, but for her posture, for her energy. It was her, the woman, who one day decided not to remain silent. More. The community organized a small opening ceremony, the mural. There was no speeches, just soft music, shared bread, and long hugs. Isabela didn't attend but noticed from away. He smiled discreetly and gave back before they saw her. Never sought to be the center of nothing. I just wanted more people to feel able to walk without fear. And seeing that mural, he knew that already was happening. In his house, next to the plants he cared for each. Tomorrow, Isabela had a wooden case where kept objects important. Letters, clippings, photographs, small grades handwritten. Not like trophies, but as reminders of each stage. From time to time when I opened the box, I read one or two letters and then carefully closed it again. He didn't need revive, he passed constantly, but he liked it. Remember where you came from and about everything. He liked to know that everything there was had sense. In one of the envelopes further, ancient, there were a note from his mother that said, "When the world don't you of space, do it you, but don't you forget to invite to others to pass." That phrase, more than any title or recognition, was the one that guided every step she took. Because Isabela Luna didn't change her world alone. She changed it, doing place for many further could walk with her. One afternoon, a group of senior students, year of law, asked permission to interview her as part of a job about social justice. Isabela agreed, but put a condition that the interview was not about she, but about he process. During the conversation, one of the students asked her which there was been he moment further difficult. Isabela thought for a moment and replied, "Accept that during a lot time, I allowed others define my value. The difficult thing was not raise your voice. It was believe that he had the right to do so." The students were left in silence. They understood that the answer did not come from theory, but from a real wound already healed. And they understood that the fight for justice does not begin in the courts, but in the mirror, in deciding that you've had enough of shrinking to fit in. In his garden rear, Isabela used to take care of a lemon tree that was there planted shortly after leaving the firm. Every year, he gave further fruits. He said that tree was his metaphor favorite, grew slowly, at its rhythm, without asking attention. But when arrived, he moment, and he offered his best, So I also saw his work. Never there was sought he applause immediate. What I wanted was to plant something that would last further beyond his presence, and I knew I was achieving. Sometimes, when some young man from the neighborhood passed by along the sidewalk and greeted her with respect, or when a neighbor asked him legal advice without fear, I felt that those were his fruits. He didn't need anything else. No plates, no ceremonies, just that. Knowing that, there was helped others to know worthy, and in that knowledge, find your greatest peace. The recognition official arrived late, like usually happen to those who do not seek it. A Foundation International wanted give him an award by his path in human rights. At first he hesitated and accepted, but then he understood that he could use that visibility for something useful. He attended the ceremony, gave a short and clear speech. This award is not for me. It's for everyone, those who rise up every day knowing that they deserve to be treated with respect, even though he whirled, I still don't understand it. Then he stepped off the stage, sat down among the public and applauded the other people, awarded with the same humility with which he lived. On social media, thousands shared his sentence, but she, like always, turned off her phone when I got home. I didn't need to see the comments. I knew that what was important wasn't virality, but consistency daily, and that nobody could remove. In the last years, began to write with more frequency, not for publication books, but to record memories, thoughts, learnings. I had notebooks with notes about situations lived, phrases heard, changes witnessed. Some the shared in workshops, others the kept for himself. One night wrote, sometimes we don't change he system from up, but from a chair badly placed, from a look ignored, from a good morning that no one returns. But everything adds up. Everything counts. That phrase was left in a center blackboard community and became motto for the new volunteers. Because Isabela had achieved something more stronger than him, change institutional. There was transformed the way in which many they understood his place in he world. And even if his steps were silent, the echo that it left continued growing. Not as a scream, but as certainty. Dignity is not asked for, it is lived. One day, while checking ancient files, digital center community, a new team member found the first project version pilot. It was full of handwritten notes, crossed out notes, discarded ideas. He printed it out and took it to the team as display of humility foundational. Isabela looked at him with a smile nostalgic. What? Everything was chaotic at the beginning, he said, laughing tenderly. But then he added, and yet there was everything important. That document became a living symbol of how the great transformations they begin with imperfect ideas, are driven by people who dare to try it without guarantees. They framed it and put it up at the entrance of the center, not as relic, but as reminder that the order is not what you create, he impact, but he purpose behind each action. In one of his last interviews, Isabela was asked by a young journalist, that advice I would give you to someone who feels little facing a world indifferent. She responded without thinking too much. Start. Although the voice trembles, although nobody listen, although seems to be of no use. Start. That phrase closed the note and it went viral quickly. It was printed in posters, t-shirts, walls of rural schools. But what Isabela didn't know is that, in silence, that same journalist there was being one of the girls who, years back, accompanied his grandmother to the literacy workshops. The cycle had been closed without ceremony, and so as many times there was planted without seeing to flourish, this time I saw he outbreak before your eyes. Because when you live with truth, the roots grow even where one never thought have left seed. In a training day for new volunteers, he raised his hand and asked, what if I have afraid of not being up to par? Isabela, sitting in circle with the rest of the group, calmly replied, fear is not the problem. The problem is letting him decide by you. Everyone kept silence. It was not a motivational phrase empty, but the truth of whom there was walked with that. Fear by years, without letting it stop her. That response became in a guide for those who arrived at the project full of doubts. Because Isabella's legacy was not only what she had fact, but how he had it fact, without hiding his weaknesses, without pretending perfection. He taught with the example that strength is not the absence of fear, but decision to move forward even with him on my back. In a tomorrow anyone, while sweep the center courtyard, a child passing by in bike stopped and said to him, "My mom says that you made things will change." Isabela bent down, smiled at her and replied, "Your mother is the one who did it. I only helped her believe in she." The child nodded, as Ye understood that the world works better when everyone pushes each other a little, some to the others. That seemed simple. One broom in the hand, one short talk, one smile shared, captured better than any article everything that Isabela had achieved. Change structures, yes, but about everything, change the way people looked at each other. Because when someone is treated with respect, he learns to respect himself. And from there, everything begins to transform. Every year, during the week of the anniversary of the first center, the teams organized a walk silent by the neighborhood. They were not wearing banners, neither they did speeches. They just walked together through the streets where all there was started, greeting neighbors, delivering brochures with basic legal information and listening stories. Isabela always participated at the end of the line, in silence. He watched with emotion as who once feared enter an office, now they walked firmly. They led workshops, guided to others. That walk became tradition, not because of what they said, but for what they represented. Firm steps of people who no longer hid. Because justice, they learned everyone. It's not just a right, it's a way of walking without bowing your head. One afternoon, sitting in his garden, Isabela opened one of her old notebooks. He calmly flipped through it, pausing in a page where, years back, there was written a phrase, "Someday, no one will have to do what I am doing I." He stayed looking those words for a long time. I no longer felt his same pain as when he wrote them. Now there was relief, because I knew that, although not all the issues were solved, yes, there was less lonely people, less silences forced, less looks that were lowered in the face of injustice. He closed a notebook and placed it on the shelf. Outside, the lemon continued giving fruits, and she, in peace. I knew that his sowing there it was worth it. What was there? Done what he could with what he had, where was, and that for her was enough. With the years ago, some people started asking, yes, sometime would write his memoirs complete. Isabela always, he responded the same. My story, already this written, but not only in my words, it is in every person who speaks freely today, who demands what is due to him, who does not let himself be silenced. For her, the memoirs were not a book, but a living multiplication of decisions brave. He liked it to think that in each corner where someone dared to say, I also deserve respect, there was a small spark of his path, not by pride, but by sense of responsibility, because I understood that the true transformation is not measured in dates, but in echoes. A sunset, at closing time by last time, he sent her where all began, now moved to a larger building. Isabela stopped at the door. He touched it with his palm open, like who thanks in silence. No one else was there, I didn't need witnesses, only she, her history, and that space that once welcomed her when the world turned its back on him. He didn't cry, he just took a deep breath, smiled and walked away. His silhouette moved away along the sidewalk as the neighborhood lights came on. A neighbor saw her walk by and shouted to her from the window, "Thank you, Isabela." She turned around, waved, and continued walking. Because so lived, without pause, without noise, but leaving a path open to whom I'd like walk. In the years following, the Isabela Luna's name began to sound less. It no longer gave interviews, neither appeared in acts public. But in each center community, in each training, your story was followed counting, not eating myth, but as a testimony. The new volunteers, They learned from her through anecdotes, notebooks ancient, phrases written on the walls. To listen is to begin to repair, said one of the posters, further ancient. And so, although his figure was not there present, your essence was it in each decision, in each look attentive, in each conversation that put people at odds above the protocol. One day, a young lawyer who never met her personally wrote an article titled "Moon Without a Reflector." In it, he talked about how legacy further, powerful is not always shouted. He stated that, thanks to the history of that women's silent that defied a structure from inside, today many could speak without fear, occupy spaces without asking permission, and be treated with respect without having to justify themselves. The text was shared in networks, universities and circles legal, and although Isabela did not comment on it publicly, he read it. He smiled at the sight his last name converted in symbol of something that never. He searched, but he sowed with each gesture. Because I understood that the true one's footprints are not seen from his sky, but in the floor by where they walk the others. In his old age, Isabela wore a life quiet, surrounded by plants, books and visitors, sporadic visits from former students, neighbors or former volunteers. Never. He stopped getting involved altogether, but now he did it from he advice-wise, from listening silent that there was cultivated by decades. He continued taking notes, observing, asking more than affirming. Sometimes in the evenings long, reread old letters or walked by his neighborhood slowly, stopping to talk to whoever I'd like tell him something. He didn't feel a legend, nor a figure important. It felt part, and for her, being part was more than enough. One day, while I was talking to a young student who had arrived at the center by a practice university student, she said to him, "Thank you for opening this path for us." Isabela looked at her tenderly and replied, "I just pushed a door. You, they decided cross it." That phrase, it was the last one that someone wrote about her before her death, years after, in peace, in your house. Nothing more witnesses that his garden blossomed and a half-finished cup of tea. His departure was not announced in covers, not even with tributes massive. But in each center community, in each woman who speaks today without lowering her gaze, in each student who dares to question what is unjust, lives his legacy. Because Isabela Luna did not seek change, he whirled. He just refused to accept it such as was. And in that negative, sowed a new way of inhabiting it. Today, in a plate, discreet upon entering the first center community that he helped found, can to be read a phrase simple. Here began to walk who taught that justice is also sown. There are no photos, nor dates, just those words that summarize a whole life, and every person you meet that door, still without knowing the story complete, feel it coming in a place different, a space where people speak clearly, listen respectfully, and act purposefully, where every who, regardless his origin, is treated as someone who matters. That was, from always, the true Isabela's project. Because in the end, Isabela Luna was not a heroine, nor a martyr, nor a exception. It was a woman common that got tired of being invisible, and when deciding, occupy his space with dignity, made visible hundreds who were also waiting to be recognized. He did not need suits, nor titles, nor speeches grandiloquent. Only his presence, his voice, and his decision not to accept what was not fair. In a world full of masks and hierarchies, she chose the truth, and in that choice changed everything forever. Thank you for following Isabela until the end. If you appreciate these kinds of stories, help us continue. Subscribe to the channel, comment, and share. Your support, it does possible.